Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever. Hello and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective, and this is my co-host Shannon Callery, our head practitioner here in the practice. Welcome back to mold. So yeah, today we're talking mold part 2, and full disclosure, we already recorded this episode and the audio was not great. So we are re-recording this. So hopefully it'll be even better than ever. And we'll be able to bring you even more amazing information about mold. Based on our previous conversation, I don't think we'll get through everything. So I do have a feeling that there will be a mold part 3. We apologize in advance that this is dragging out. And mold's a really big deal, and we see a lot of mold in our practice, and we feel it's super important to dive super deep into this because it's really misunderstood, it's really missed. And I literally just got off on a call with someone who I think there's a lot of things being missed with, and she's working with a mold specialist, quote unquote. And so we want to make sure that we cover this in really great detail. And we do have a very high success rate in our practice of helping people detox from mold, among all of the other things that come along with mold. So we want to be able to provide all of that information for you. So yes. That's kind of where we're landing. So today we're going to start talking about, I know we didn't get through much last time. We'll see where we land today. We did talk a lot. Testing took a long time when we first recorded this, and I have a feeling it will be the same here today. So we're going to talk about testing first, and we're going to talk about a variety of testing and how mold can show up. We're going to talk about basic blood work. We're going to talk about functional labs, all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to get into all of it, and I'm going to stop talking and let Shannon take over here and get started, because you're going to hear me talk a lot about the functional lab piece. So I'm going to stop talking for a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and keep this pretty simple and not make it complicated, just because it is complicated. So we will do our best to make it very clear and precise. And then, like Megan said, this is also our second time recording, so hopefully we'll be able to rein it in a little bit this time too. But when it comes to mold, just like any other thing, really, the first thing that we like to look at is always blood work, just because we can find so much information from that, combined with your symptoms and asking you other questions and seeing where you're at. So when it comes to blood work, I would say there's 2 big things or pieces that stick out to me, and that would be looking at blood sugar markers and then cholesterol markers. So for blood sugar markers, specifically glucose, insulin, C-peptide, and then there's also another one called LDH. But I would say the main 3 that I typically look at are those first 3 that I mentioned. And when we're looking at those markers, so with glucose, when it's elevated is more what we're looking for, not so much when it's low. Yes, that matters. But when it's high, that's more of an indication of a long-term problem in the body that's showing long-standing inflammation. So that's really the big thing that we're looking at with glucose. And then, of course, we always need to talk to you and see how you're feeling too, because that matters. And then same thing with insulin. So too much or too little insulin can be an issue for sure. But really, when it's high, this can also indicate inflammation in the body, and then also signs of a cell danger response, which pretty much means your body is just kind of shutting down at that point and saying hey, I need help. Your cells don't have energy anymore to function, to process toxins out of your body like mold. So that marker is also pretty important too. And then very similar with C-peptide as well, which is used alongside insulin, kind of like a comparison, I guess you could say. But also when that marker is high, that can indicate some inflammation and cell danger response as well. So I would say those are the three markers that we look at with blood work. Yeah. Anything to add to that? Because I
Yeah,
know.
like itching to add on some stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
So just a couple of things. So when most people, I was going to say a different word, when most people get blood work run, I'm going to try and keep it a little PC. So when most people get blood work run, glucose is often ran as part of the complete metabolic panel for anyone in the US. Often it needs to be run separately for anyone outside of the US. And we're looking at fasting glucose. So this is fasted for ideally overnight, at least 12 hours. This is you not having coffee in the morning. This is, just
Big
like
thing.
really on empty, like maybe a little bit of water, like plain water, no electrolytes, no nothing in it. First thing in the morning before you get the test run, like that's totally fine. HbA1c is the other marker that is often ran. And it is fine as a marker itself. It's not super specific as some of these other markers that we mentioned, and I am going to dive a little bit deeper into both of those too. But often we will see HbA1c trending a little bit on the higher side as well with this. Now, C-peptide and insulin, you will more often see insulin ran than C-peptide. I honestly don't even know if I've ever seen a non-functional medicine practitioner without a recommendation from someone in the functional world run C-peptide.
Mhm.
The reason we like C-peptide, especially if we had to pick one or the other, if we had to pick insulin or C-peptide, we're going to recommend C-peptide. And the reason being is insulin is very, very sensitive. It's a very sensitive marker. Like even the dinner, like your dinner the night before can impact blood work the next day. So C-peptide's a little bit more stable of a marker, and it's going to show us a little bit of a longer trend versus being quite so sensitive. So that's why we will often, if we'd love to see both, but if we're going to pick one, we're going to recommend C-peptide over insulin. So if you've ever had blood work run through us, that's the reason. And that's why if we recommend a panel to you, that's why we're often going to recommend C-peptide over insulin. The other thing I just want to be clear on is mold is not the only reason we might see some blood sugar issues. Like there
Yeah.
are many other things that can contribute to this. But, if we're seeing someone who is eating moderately, not perfect, but moderately well, and they cannot get their blood sugar under control, and and we're seeing that on lab testing. If we're also seeing, when they eat, they get a crash like right after they eat within like 30 to 60 minutes. If you can't go more than like 2, 3, 4 hours without eating before getting like super hangry, just like ravenous almost, and you get a headache and you get the irritability that comes with that, those are all signs to us that there is something going on. And it may just be your nutrition. And if we've worked on your nutrition, if you're already eating decently, we got to look at other reasons why this may be going on. And mold can be a big reason why.
Yeah. And that's the same for anything really, like even the cholesterol panel as well. Like, of course, we are always going to talk about food and the way you're eating, what you're eating. If you're eating a lot of processed and packaged foods and, having a lot of sodas and all the things, lots of sugary things, especially on an empty stomach, coffee in the morning, it's not uncommon that you're going to have some blood sugar regulation issues, and same with cholesterol markers. So we do, and that's why we always talk about things, we check in on symptoms, what else is going on. I think most of our clientele that we're speaking with is coming to us eating fairly decent. I would say it's maybe like 50-50. So that is important to remember too. Like when we're talking about these things, like of course you can have blood sugar regulation issues and not have mold toxicity. So keep that in mind when you're listening to this podcast. But yeah, good point. And I'm also glad that you brought up the not having coffee or electrolytes in the morning, because I just got blood work done and I noticed on the screen when I checked in the morning, it was like, have you fasted? And then it said black coffee like doesn't count. And then, obviously water doesn't count. And I was like, oh, wow. Like I didn't know that they actually told people it was okay to drink black coffee in the mornings before getting blood work done. So I'm glad you brought that up too.
Yeah, super important. There's a lot of things they don't mention to you when you get blood work run that these things do impact your lab
Yeah.
test results.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so yeah, next portion would be cholesterol markers. And really, total cholesterol is really just like it's a calculation. So it's not a direct marker. So of course, like we look at it, it matters if it's crazy high. It kind of ties into the other markers as well. Really, LDL cholesterol and HDL cholesterol are the two main ones that we're looking at. Triglycerides. Whew, that was a hard one for me to spit out today. Um, Also a good marker, but in from what I learned, and this is my take on it, like that is more of a diet thing for me. Like we're looking at that gives us more indication on like what kind of food are you eating? What quality of food are you eating? Again, are you eating a lot of processed packaged foods? And then if it's low, are you not eating enough food? And we see that a lot because especially a lot of females just are not eating enough food, which can cause problems. So that's more what triglycerides are when we look at that. But LDL cholesterol, so when it's high or when it's low, can indicate some sort of toxicity or infection going on in the body. And then for HDL, when it's high is really what we're looking at. That can indicate some sort of inflammation and toxicity going on in the body. And when we look at, I'm really going to try to not get deep into this because this could be like a whole other conversation, but HDL cholesterol is kind of like the cleanup crew. Like it goes in and it cleans up any of the oxidized cholesterol that may be floating around in your body, in your liver and whatnot. So that, I mean, both of those markers are super important. And again, if you come to us and you're eating a great diet, you're eating lots of whole foods, getting all your protein in, drinking a lot of water, and your cholesterol is just like totally crazy, doesn't make sense, really good indication that there is something bigger going on in your body. Could be mold. Lots of other questions to ask around that too, but I would say those are the main markers that we're looking at when we look at the cholesterol panel.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize this other piece of cholesterol, and it hits close to home with me because I had this issue and no one told me about it for a really long time, and it's something I'm always aware of, and I actually do see this quite a bit, and I've never brought it up to someone, and no one else has ever brought it up to them, and that is low cholesterol.
Mm.
Cholesterol is really important. Cholesterol, it's neither good nor bad. It's a carrier, and it helps transport things. If we have too much, that is not great. But also, if we don't have enough, that is not great. And it really, low cholesterol, there's some really good studies out there linking low cholesterol to mental health issues, including anxiety and depression. And if you aren't eating enough, for sure that can impact your mental health. But I mean, for me, I was eating super clean. I was definitely eating enough. Like I was in a good spot from like things I was doing. I wasn't feeling very good, but I was doing things that were all very good for my body. And I had low cholesterol, and my anxiety and depression were really high at that point. And now I was also dealing with chronic pain. I had people telling me I was crazy, and I just needed to go back on meds for anxiety and depression, and all of my symptoms were related to that. So I mean, there was other factors going on, but if we have low cholesterol and we're not producing enough, I mean, and this is across the board, triglycerides, HDL, LDL, HDL, and then obviously, we'll see total cholesterol this way too. But if we're trending on the low side, and I am going to go over some specific numbers here just for reference for everyone and what we look at, that is also a major red flag for us.
Mhm.
And just something to be mindful of, something to look at. And I've never seen anyone with low cholesterol and not have pretty significant mental health struggles.
Yeah.
So just please keep that in mind, that we're so reinforced in our society that high cholesterol, like, you don't want high cholesterol. High cholesterol is bad. And low cholesterol is also a pretty significant issue here, especially if you do have mental health struggles. It's really important to look at this. So, from a total cholesterol standpoint, and this really depends on age and gender. Like, women should have more cholesterol than men, just naturally, just as a human being. That's what we need and what our body should be producing. And as we age, we do produce more cholesterol, and that is a normal and natural thing. So these numbers are really generic, that I'm going to say, but total cholesterol, if you're around 150, I'm gonna be asking some questions and looking at some other things. HDL, if you're 60 or below, it's gonna start asking questions. LDL, 80 or below. Triglycerides, 50 or below. And even if you're within about 10 points, 10, depending on your age, like 10 to 20 points within that, I'm going to start asking some questions. And I want to know how your mental health is, mental and emotional health is. I want to know all of these other symptoms that are going on, because it may indicate something bigger going on. For me, it was heavy metal toxicity. So, it's not exclusive to mold. Blood sugar can be a little bit more specific to mold, I think, than cholesterol, because cholesterol is a little bit more generic. And if we see both of these together, we're going to really start asking some questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, cholesterol, to not go down the rabbit hole, your liver produces cholesterol on its own. Like, there's also the conversation of like dietary intake of cholesterol, and realistically, your body's going to produce it anyway, so it doesn't matter that much. Of course, like, that goes back to quality of food and eating not a ton of like processed meats and all the things. Of course, that's not going to be great for your body if you're putting a bunch of chemically processed meat in it. But regardless, your body's going to produce it. We need it to live. I can't remember the name of it. I think there's like one scenario or something where God, what's the word? Like a genetic predisposition situation where you can not produce enough cholesterol, and I'm pretty sure you don't have a long lifespan if that is the case. So yeah, I mean, if you're interested in it, do some research on your own. Weston Price probably has some great information on their website about it. But yeah, we need cholesterol. It actually binds to toxins in bacteria as well, which is just another indication of why we look at this when we're looking for mold, because it's going to give us an idea of what's the toxin load like in your body. How's your liver processing? Yeah, there's multiple patterns with this that we're looking at. It's not always just going to be the direct markers that we talked about.
Yeah, and I want to talk about something a little controversial here and just bring this up, but while we're talking about cholesterol, because this also plays a really big role here, and we talked about not producing enough. Well, here's the thing about cholesterol too, the way Western medicine runs it. It is not a great indication of what is actually going on with the lipoproteins in our body. So if you are concerned about your cholesterol, if you have a quote unquote family history, and I'm going to dive deeper into that in just a sec here, real quick. We highly recommend doing an NMR lipo profile. And this is going to give you a better indication of what is actually going on with the lipoproteins in your blood vessels. And this
Which is the part that matters.
Yeah, I was going to say, and this is really what matters. HDL-C, LDL-C, which is what the standard Western medicine runs, they're so generic, and they really are a better indication of inflammation, cell danger response, all that kind of stuff, versus looking at these other areas that are going to give you a better indication. And here's the thing. If you have a quote unquote family history, there's really only one marker that is going to show you if you have a family history, and that's lipoprotein little a. And that is I've I've rarely seen it run. It's usually a cardiologist that's going to run it, if anyone. And so just keep that in mind. And that if we see that lipoprotein little a, like if that comes up flagged for us, then we're going to talk about reducing your intake of cholesterol, specifically your saturated fat. Outside of that, it appears from all very good studies that dietary intake of cholesterol does not have a major impact on our standard Western medicine cholesterol markers.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And we do have a panel. The NMR is part of our mold panel, correct? That's on there?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think it
If
is.
not, it's in our comprehensive one.
Yeah, or yep. I think the mold comprehensive that we have, the NMR is included in there. And really, if you are curious, like truly curious about your cholesterol health, you have to run the NMR because it's not enough information. The basic cholesterol panel that doctors normally run, it's just not enough. There's no way to identify like how big and small the lipoproteins are, which is really what matters when it comes to like clogging factors, clogging arteries and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend asking about it. They would probably push back, and it would also most likely be expensive for your insurance to run. But if it's something that you're interested in, it is part of some of our panels. And yeah, it really is a great thing to get done at least once in your life if you want to know, like, where am I at with this?
Exactly. It's once again, especially if you have a quote unquote family history,
Yes, for sure.
it's a valuable panel to run.
Yeah. But as far as blood markers, anything else you want to add to blood markers?
Yeah, just liver markers. We'll
Oh,
often
yeah.
see some weird stuff going on with liver enzymes in particular. So AST, ALT are big ones. Alkaline phosphatase is another big one. We're often going to see those elevated. Alkaline phosphatase is an interesting one. So often we will see it elevated. However, parasites often come with mold as well.
Oh, yeah.
And parasites will often steal zinc from the body, and that can drive down alkaline phosphatase to actually be on the lower end of things. So that's a little bit of a trickier one, but AST, ALT will often see higher. We'll often see inflammation markers, HSCRP, homocysteine, white blood cell count, nutrient deficiencies, looking at red blood cell count, hematocrit, hemoglobin, MCV, MCH, MCHC. We'll often see, specific nutrients, folate, B12, zinc, copper. We'll see some weird markers with. Those are not all standard markers that are run, just by the way. And, iron markers. Iron markers can get real funky as well. And specifically, okay, so we'll go down this route. I was deciding if I wanted to dive down this rabbit hole because it's a whole other thing too. So iron saturation is a big one that we look at. And iron saturation is what is inside of your cells, like the actual saturation of your cells, which is arguably one of the most important iron markers that exist, or potentially the most important, in my opinion, probably the most important. So we could see that trending crazy low, or we could see that trending consistently high. And it's a real question mark. And for reference range, our range there is 25 to 40%. The other thing
I just want to throw this out there really quick. This is why you need to look at these markers before you take beef liver, before you eat a lot of it, because that's super important. Not everybody needs beef liver in that amount. If you have high iron, it's not going to help anything. It's going to make things worse. I just wanted to add that in.
Yes. And I mean, we'll bring this up. I'll bring this up because it's a personal issue for me. So I struggle with iron oversaturation, and I have done a protocol to try and work through this because I've been avoiding donating blood, which is really what I need to do, and I will be doing. Iron oversaturation can present similarly to anemia. And a lot of the symptoms, fatigue, muscle weakness, some of the cognitive stuff, that can come along with iron oversaturation. Please be hesitant in taking anything with iron unless ideally you've had at least your iron saturation and TIBC ran. So we'll often see just weird things going on with your iron saturation. Ferritin, we might see trending very low or trending high. And ferritin is not a great iron marker. If you are only using ferritin as an iron marker, like this is how I ended up with iron oversaturation in the first place, because I was working with someone who wasn't well trained in iron and she put me on an iron supplement, which should have never, ever happened. So please be mindful of that. Ferritin by itself, not a great marker because it's impacted by so many other things, including inflammation. And so, I mean, I've seen ferritin in like less than 10, but iron saturation be totally fine. And it's because of inflammation, mold or otherwise. Same thing with serum iron. Serum iron is outside of the cell, not a great marker by itself. Helpful, yes, not by itself though. So ideally we would like to see in an iron panel, iron saturation, TIBC, probably two of the most important, serum iron, and then ferritin's a real hit or miss for me because it's impacted by so many other things. We've also seen, I mean, we've seen with some mold people, some of our mold clients, like 200s plus for their ferritin, and their iron saturation was fine. And so it's really important. The reason I went into this is because it's really important to look at everything together. It's not just about one marker. It's not just about one type of panel. It's about looking at all of these things together. And one of the reasons, and how Shannon and I were both trained, is look at these markers, look at the ranges, these small ranges that we work in, these functional ranges that we work in, and what story is this blood work telling us? And then how do we couple that with symptoms? And then that's going to give us a pretty clear, usually, indication of what's going on. And if it gives us if we're asking more questions at the end of it, then we're probably going to recommend functional lab testing at that point because we need some more information before we move forward.
Yeah. And I was just going to say I mean, we can talk about specific markers all we want, but when it comes down to looking at the test, we're always looking for different patterns that line up with like the story that you're telling us. Like Megan said, it's never going to be, we're just looking at markers. Is it in range? Is it not in range? Like that's not how functional blood work works at all. So it's very much so like big picture. Yeah. And then if we don't feel like we have enough information is when we're going to dive into different types of functional testing, which we'll talk about here in a sec.
Exactly. So if you ever got on a call with us, we'll often ask you for your blood work, especially, so let's bring it back to mold here. So if we suspect mold, in our first mold episode, when we went down the symptom list, if you are presenting with some of the big symptoms that are present in mold, the next step is we're going to look at your blood work and we're going to see, all right, what patterns are we seeing? Is your blood work telling us a very similar story in that you probably have some mold based on everything we just talked about? Is mold screaming to us? And if it is, if you've ever had a conversation with either one of us as part of a free consult, we will tell you this point blank. We will not recommend functional lab testing if you have clear results to us. Now, that doesn't mean we aren't open to recommending testing, which we'll talk about the two tests that are often recommended and what we prefer, but we will not recommend testing. And this goes back to our own health stories and being over tested and spending thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars that wasn't really necessary on testing. Now, if we are borderline and we're like, it could go either way here, like we are not getting a clear answer, we will absolutely recommend an additional test or two for you, usually just one, but usually we will recommend at that point a test for you because mold is so different in how we address it that we need a clear indication of mold or no mold. And so this is where functional lab testing comes in. Before I dive into this, is there anything else you want to share about blood work or anything?
No, I think just adding in like I know everyone is very like test, don't guess, which of course we are on that route too, which is why we like to look at blood work, but we're also not going to waste your time. Like it really bothers me specifically because we both experienced this with seeing multiple practitioners who are like, let's keep testing, let's keep going with testing. It's so much money, and it's also not necessary if you can very clearly see what's going on, especially if you ask someone, do you know if you live in mold, have you been exposed to mold before? And they say yes, I currently live in it, I was exposed to it for 10 plus years. Then no, I'm not going to recommend that you do spend $400 on another test. That seems very silly to me. But again, like if you want to run it, if you really want to confirm, sure, we'll do it for you. But I just wanted to add that part in because that is just something that I feel like maybe separates us a little bit from how other functional medicine businesses operate. So,
Exactly. And even if we do recommend testing, look, we don't make money off of tests.
yeah.
We do charge for interpretation because that's our time, and it takes us a good amount of time. And I will talk about that specifically for one of these tests. We ask to be compensated for our time to interpret, but for the actual tests themselves, we make $0. So it is not, and that is not the case with the vast majority of practitioners, people in the functional medicine space. We could charge excess for this for sure and make some additional extra money. And we've been there, and we've spent, $500 for a $200 stool test because, and that doesn't include the interpretation fee. So
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. Yeah, it breaks my heart when I see people pay outrageous amounts of money for these tests that I know exactly how much they cost, and it's not close
Yeah.
to what people are paying for them. So
Yeah. Same.
we'll also put a link to our Rupa store if you are interested in functional lab testing. And for reference, once again, like I order my own testing through Rupa because it's the cheapest that I've seen. Blood work is an exception. There's another company that we use because it is cheaper. But for any of the functional lab tests, Rupa is definitely cheaper.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Megan is going to take it away here with the two other functional tests that we use. She has a little bit more experience with interpreting these tests. I mean, I'm very familiar with them, but as far as going deep and breaking down each marker, I'm going to let her talk about that today.
Yeah, so get ready to listen to me talk here for a minute. So the first one is a mycotoxin test, and this is probably the more commonly used and recommended test. And this is the one that I prefer typically is from Mosaic, formerly known as Geneva Diagnostics. There's also a pretty good one from Vibrant is it Vibrant Wellness?
Wellness. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
Vibrant Wellness. So they have a good one too. Vibrant is not available on Rupa, just for reference. So we'll often recommend the Mosaic one. Still very good, in my opinion. And the mycotoxin test is looking at a variety of mycotoxins, which indicate mold. And so what you'll see on this test, and if you go to their website, and we'll put a link in the show notes to like a sample report of what this looks like. You'll see a breakdown of 14 different, and it's a large group strands of mold. And within each, the big one is OTA. That's a really big one for a lot of people. If someone's going to show up mold positive, a lot of times that is a very common one to show up positive. It's not the only one, but that is a very, very common one. And within OTA, there's actually a variety of different strands of mycotoxins and different types of mycotoxins. And if you look at mold testing, like an ERMI, it's not going to look exactly the same because with OTA, just because this is the biggest one, this is one that comes to me off the top of my head, Aspergillus and Penicillium are two common types of mold that will show up under OTA. So it's not an exact thing, but you have to just dig a little bit deeper, and you have to be familiar with these tests, these different types of mycotoxins to understand and almost like put the the actual mold testing, like physical mold testing, if you're doing physical mold testing versus the mycotoxin testing and how this shows up in your body. So just like for reference, just I have gotten questions about that before.
Really quick, if you
Yeah.
don't know what a mycotoxin is, it is essentially like a toxin that is produced by the fungus. Just wanted to clarify that.
Great point. This is also a urine test for reference. Both of these tests that we're going to talk about are urine tests. So the mycotoxin test is fine. It is fine. It's a test to run for mold. It is not the only, or in our opinion, the best, because we're only getting an idea of what strands of mold are in your body. Helpful, but not the most helpful, because mold does not travel by itself. It comes with a lot of other things, and a lot of mold binders do overlap. We know that mold, and we'll talk about this when we actually talk about addressing mold, but different strands of mold have different binders that often work the best, but there is a lot of overlap for a lot of these. And so I think we'll dive deeper into that in the next episode when we talk about this. But I know that comes up a lot when people ask about doing a mycotoxin test, like, don't I need to know exactly what strand of mold? Well, not usually, because we know that the big binders, humic, fulvic acid, charcoal, clay, and some of these other ones often target all of them. And so, down the road now, if we do additional testing, if we're still really struggling, this may be a time when we do a mycotoxin test. Right off the bat, though, not typically the most common test we're going to recommend. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and you'll see on the sample test, it's a range. There's like a little green bar and then it's a red bar. Obviously, you don't want to be in the red. However, it also kind of depends on where you are on the green bar, because if you're pretty close to the red bar, I'm going to start asking questions. If you've got a few things that pop up that are in green, I'm going to start asking questions. So no functional lab test is black and white. It's not like you got it, you don't, this is what we do based on that. There is actual interpretation that goes into this, which is why we charge for it. The mycotoxin test is a relatively easy test to read. In my opinion, yes, I have taken a couple of different courses on how to read this, because once again, there's some fine points is when people start to get like a rural borderline, or we're seeing multiple things pop up. So just keep that in mind. I also want to share, because this is on the test and I don't agree. I've just never seen this. I've never seen enough evidence to support this claim. I've never seen this in practicality in our practice. Food isn't, and I know we covered this last time, but food isn't gonna create a really high level of a mycotoxin popping up on your test. I mean, you'd have to eat a crazy amount of like crazy mold-ridden food for it to show up on your mycotoxin test. So no, I don't think, if you're coming up in the red on anything, it's not from food. If you come up in one or two, maybe on some of the green pieces, yeah, maybe that's from food. But it's not going to be overwhelmingly in your body and coming out via urine just from food. We've got to have another source of exposure going on here. And I know we touched on the peanuts and the coffee in the first episode. Please reference back to that where we dive a little bit deeper into that. But I did just want to bring it up. So that's the mycotoxin test. Yeah. Anything else I missed when it comes to this?
No, and I can't remember. Is it the same as the oat test where do they tell you to eat certain foods before you take the test, or to avoid? I can't remember what they are, if that's the case.
Yeah. So they do recommend on both of these tests, basically any urine test, they are going to recommend you avoid a few foods. And please read the directions, like please thoroughly read the directions before you complete any functional lab tests, especially these ones. Grapes, apples, I think pears, it's like really random. So please check out the full list in the instructions, and it's just a 48 hours. They recommend avoiding it. We recommend avoiding supplements or pausing supplements, not medications, just pausing supplements for like 3 to 5 days before any of these tests, including any sort of blood work. That also goes with the urine testing, or really most of the functional lab testing. We want you off supplements for a few days.
Yes.
And so I guess I will talk about this here because this is more important for the mycotoxin test. So there's also the question of, should you provoke the mycotoxins?
That's more what I was getting at when I asked
Okay.
that question. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So provoking often looks like adding in a binder. Charcoal is often the one that I see most recommended. It's fine. It's a fine starter binder. It's not my favorite. Please also make sure you take charcoal or clays away from literally everything else, all supplements, medications, all food, everything, because it is a non-selective binder, meaning it will bind up anything and everything that it comes into contact with, which is also another reason we don't recommend taking something like that long term. Yes, we do use that in our practice sometimes, and for a short period of time for a specific reason, often as a secondary mold protocol. So often a binder, and then something to support the liver. This could be something like milk thistle. This could be something like TEDCA. This can be something, a castor oil pack use to provoke these things, to provoke your body to start expelling these mycotoxins at a higher rate. I haven't found this to be super necessary. If you're not, I find more harm than good oftentimes, because now if you've been working with someone and you're going into this test and you have provoked, that's fine. Assuming you're under the care of someone who knows what they're doing, you've done it safely, you have not just randomly started doing all of this stuff by yourself. Because what can happen is if you start any sort of detox protocol, and this would be this, in this case, similar to a provoking protocol, you can get really sick and you can do your body more harm than good. And that is my precaution in not recommending provoking, is because it can lead to some really significant and bad detox reactions. And you should not have to do that, number one. Number two, you shouldn't have to do that alone. So that's why we don't recommend provoking unless we've already been doing protocols.
I'm really borderline on that, to be honest with you, because to me, it makes more sense to see how your body is functioning at a normal point, as opposed to trying to push it to release toxins like that. To be honest, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I'm always going to go the other route where, like, let's just see where you're at. Let's see how your body functions normally as it should. And then of course, when we retest, that's a different story, because we're already going to have done some drainage support, some detox work. So there's nothing we can do about that. But for like a starting point, for sure, I would not recommend provoking.
Yeah. And I mean, same thing kind of goes with like an HTMA, hair tissue mineral analysis, and heavy metals. Do you provoke? Do you not provoke? Provoking looks different with HTMA, in my opinion, just because you're getting 3 months worth of data with hair versus just several hours with urine. Different thing, but I'm just not typically a fan, because if you know how to interpret these things and you're looking at the whole picture, once again, we're not just going to look at a mycotoxin test.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll look at it if you have it, and I want to talk to you, and I want to know all of your symptoms, and I want to look at your blood work. I want to look at all of this stuff together because it all paints a picture for us. Mm-hmm. So that's a mycotoxin test. So the other one, and this is the one we more commonly run in our practice, which is an organic acids test, which is also another urine test. For reference, these are both over $300. There's not a major price difference for either one of these. I think it's like $10 to $20 difference. If you're going to spend the money on a functional lab test and we think it's mold, I would go organic acids test, or an organic acids test, or an OAT is going to give us 77 different markers here. And we're going to get a full look at the gut. We're going to look at yeast, fungus, and bacteria in the gut, which is so important and such valuable information, especially the yeast and fungus markers. This is an important distinction. Yeast and fungus takes a long time to show up in a stool test. It shows up much quicker in a urine test. So if you have chronic UTIs, yeast infections, oral thrush, the white coating on your tongue, an organic acids test is going to be way more valuable than a stool test, in my opinion. So keep that in mind. Also, the question is why? Why do you have these issues? A stool test isn't going to give us any answers to any of that. So it's going to show us, do we have bacteria and other stuff going on in the gut? Okay, but why do we have this stuff? So we're going to get all of those markers. And within those, we actually have some mold markers. So markers 2, and I'm not going to pronounce the actual names because
There's a lot.
yeah, they're rough. There's a few I might be open to sharing, but you're going to have to look at the sample report and we'll share that in the show notes as well. So markers 2, 4, and 9 are big ones that we'll look at. 2 and 4 in particular, and then number 9 is a fungal toxin. So those are big ones that we'll often look at. We'll often see yeast, fungus, and bacterial overgrowth in some form or capacity when we've got mold issues. So the next ones that we really look at, I actually have this up in front of me. So we'll look at those ones, and then up next are really big ones. So the next ones are going to be oxalate markers. And these are really, really important. So really, this is like 19 through 21 are oxalate markers, but even like in through 23, like 19 through 23 are big ones. We'll often see elevations in one or multiple of these with mold. They're a little specific. Number 21 tends to be more of a heavy metal marker than a mold marker. For reference, it's not a perfect heavy metal marker, but it is a decent one. Most of the other ones are going to indicate mold if one or multiple of these are trending on the higher side. And here's the thing with the organic acids test too. The organic acid test is so complicated. Some things you want low, some things you want high, some things you want in the middle, and some things like don't even matter when they're by themselves. You have to look at the whole section of the thing. So this is not a black and white test by any stretch of the imagination. Even, I mean, I've taken a course that didn't even cover mold when talking about the organic acids test. So even like looking for mold in an organic acids test, like not everyone is trained in how to do that just with this interpretation. So just please keep all of that in mind. So yeah, oxalate's really big. Now, if we have a really significant oxalate issue, we're also probably going to recommend you do some sort of, and you're exhibiting symptoms of food intolerances, like especially if you start to sneeze, if you start to get rashes, hives, you start to get red, like you start to get a sinus pressure, sinus headache while you're eating, we're probably going to recommend a lower histamine or lower oxalate diet. And this is a good indication. We don't like to do that, but if we need to for symptom management, we absolutely will. So those are all things that we look at. The next big sections here, we've got 2 on mitochondrial health. By and large, we'll often see mitochondrial dysfunction going on here. Now, that is not mold specific. We will see that with lots of other things too. So mitochondrial dysfunction we will often see. And next is neurotransmitters. Now, if you have a long history of anxiety, depression, mental health struggles, this is also another really valuable test that you may want to consider running just for the neurotransmitter piece of this, because this is the only test that I know of that does this good of a job, plus all these other things that can impact your neurotransmitters. Now, there is a section of one of the Dutch tests that also includes some of these markers, but it's not all of them. It's not to the extent of these. So just, I do also like this test for that. So we're going to look at a couple different dopamine markers. We're going to look at epinephrine, neuroepinephrine. We're going to look at serotonin. And these are all really valuable tools and information for us to have. The other really big marker I like in this section is quinolinic acid. This one I will pronounce. I feel pretty confident in my pronunciation of that. And for reference, it is marker 39. So with quinolinic acid, this is a neurotoxin. And if you have mold, it is not exclusive to mold, but mold and heavy metals are probably the 2 most common reasons why we'll see this elevated. If this is even a little high, it is a big deal. This one does also show up on the Dutch test. I think it's the complete one or the comprehensive one. I can't remember which one, but it includes a little piece of this. This is really important. This impacts your brain health so much, not only with mental and emotional health, but also brain fog, concentration, focusing, recall, all that kind of stuff. This plays such a big role. And if this is elevated, if this mark is trending high, this is a really big deal, in my opinion. And there, I mean, huge red flag. And I've pointed this out on many people's testing that never knew. And this is, I mean, it's just such a big deal for me because it really does make it's so important. It's so important. So next we get into nutrient deficiencies. We also look at how your body's using fuel. Is it using sugar or fat for fuel? And that is really important information. Once again, these start to get real tricky, high, low, in the middle, the patterns of all of these. Just for reference, like an easy one, vitamin C should be low. If your vitamin C is high, please go see a physician immediately because that means your body's not processing it. Vitamin C has a very short half-life, so it should be very low. The other one that I will want to talk about here a little bit more is NAC. NAC we can't look at by itself. NAC is converted to glutathione. And so we need to look at glutathione itself, and it's under the next section, detoxification. What is it? Indicators of detoxification. So if NAC is low, but it's converted to glutathione, that's not a big deal. Now, if NAC is low and glutathione is low, that's a big deal. If NAC is high and glutathione is low, or even kind of in the middle, like that's also not a good thing. So we need to look at the patterns here and look at this. We also look at other indicators of detoxification, methylation, like are you currently being exposed? What about ammonia? Ammonia we'll often see with bacterial and or parasite issues. Parasites do not come up on this test. We need to look at blood work. Go listen back to our parasite episode. And then we also look at 61 is like aspartame and some other bacterian things. Then we look at amino acid profile. Once again, like these should all be low. And if one or two are trending on the higher side, it can be an indication of a nutrient deficiency. It can be like something specific. If you're on medication, you have to let your practitioner know who's interpreting this because we will often see certain ones high, especially if you're on anything for anxiety or depression. Please let us know because that will impact this section among other sections a little bit here. And then 76 phosphoric acid. This is also, we need to look at blood work for this. We need to look at your vitamin D. We need to look at calcium, magnesium, in particular, those three minerals, because it usually indicates a deficiency in one or several of those. So that's the organic acid test. In a nutshell, for reference, I have quite a bit of experience running and interpreting the organic acid test. It still takes me about 45 to 60 minutes, depending on the test, to interpret. So that is why we charge for it.
Yeah.
Because it takes some time because I want to make sure I do it due justice and take the time to really go through it very, very thoroughly. So if you have had it run by someone else and you want a full interpretation, that is also an option. I will do a quick look over on a free consult. I don't do a super deep dive. I'll spend about 10 minutes and I'm looking at like big highlighting points. Looking for mold, looking for heavy metals, looking at the overgrowth issues, neurotransmitters, and detoxification pathways. Those are the big things I'll look at if you do a free consult, but I'll also happy to do that.
Yeah, first of all, great job at explaining it in the short amount of time that you did, because there's so much information to that test. Like Megan said, it just takes time to go over it and piece it all together. So I feel like that was a great snippet to give you an idea of everything that you can learn from the test and maybe a couple major points that you're looking for on the test. Just one other thing before we wrap up that I wanted to add in was, because we spent so much time talking about testing today, especially the functional testing of like the lab ranges for blood work. I know it can seem really confusing when you go into your doctor and they're looking at your tests and they're telling you that nothing is wrong. And then you come see people like us and we're like, okay, we're throwing all this stuff at you that we see going on in your body. And the reason it's different when we look at it is because our ranges are much shorter. So when Western medicine just has way, way wider ranges when it comes to labs and other testing, and the reason that we we have these shorter ranges in that they are shorter is because we're looking for the problems before they start. We're looking for the patterns before they become diseases and other illnesses and whatnot. So, I mean, when you're going into your doctor and then, you're presenting with all these symptoms and they pretty much just say like, hey, we're not able to help you. We don't see anything going on here. It's just because their specific training is to help with disease and like really not far-fetched. I can't think of the word. When something is like past where it should be, when your health is like essentially plummeting, which I feel bad saying that. Again, I'm not hating on doctors. We have them for a reason. Western medicine is very, very important, huge advancements there, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I know it can feel like I don't know what to listen to. I don't know who to trust. And if that's how you're feeling, tune into your intuition and just see what sits best with you. If you feel good with what Western medicine is telling you and you're in a good mental place and that feels good, or if you're like, something's not right and I just feel like they're missing it, it's really important to just like tune in and listen to your body, because I know it's really easy to get overwhelmed, especially when we're throwing like all this stuff at you. So just keep that in mind.
Exactly. And we also look at everything together.
Yeah.
That is another really important role. And yeah, the way Western medicine is trained, this is the way I like to explain it, is you have a lab test, it shows a number, you have a symptom that has a box, and then based on those two boxes, you have a third box that equals a medication. And if you don't have that third box, if there is no medication, they can't help you oftentimes.
Yeah.
They can refer you out to someone else who may have another medication or another test that if that comes up positive plus your symptom, that equals the medication. And so it's not preventative. And
Yes.
that's it's when things have already progressed and progressed to the point where there is a medication that is needed. We don't do that. We look early. We know the early signs and stages of things, and that's what we look at to help
Yeah.
support the body from getting to
Yeah.
those states if we can.
Yeah. The imbalances. That's the word that I was looking for. We want to see the imbalances, where are they at? Because we know when things are out of balance, and if they're not put back into balance, then that's when we start to have bigger issues. So yeah, just wanted to add that in.
I think that's great. Yes, I think that's good. It's so good and so important. So we were next going to talk about what goes wrong. However, I think we'll save that for next time because we're already almost at an hour, and so I think next time we'll cover. And I promise we're really going to try and just do one more episode on mold to try and keep it simple for you guys. So we'll cover what people get wrong and why we think it's wrong. Most importantly, why we think it's wrong, the pitfalls, and then we'll get into our protocols and how do we address mold and the full process of really what that looks like, because we do have such a high success rate in helping people heal from mold illness, mold toxicity, and there's a reason for that. And I do also just want to share this, like, we have a lot of training. Shannon obviously has personal experience of dealing with mold herself. I do not. I've taken a lot of trainings. I'm familiar with the big protocols that are out there. If you name one, I am probably familiar with. We do not follow any of those protocols, and we do not follow them for a reason. We take things from all of these different protocols and have come up with some different, and everyone is a little bit different. We have generic, where we're going to go over like big picture what we do. We will go over some specific supplements and things like that for you guys, but just for reference, we don't follow and I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but we don't follow anyone's very specific protocols because we don't find that they work across the board. So we pick and choose, and it depends on the person. It depends on what they need, and we'll talk about mast cell stabilizers and get into all of that next time. Yeah, be prepared for a rant on mast cell stabilizers.
Yeah, it'll
It is
happen.
coming. I feel very strongly about mast cell stabilizers and people not knowing what they are and confusing them with other things. So anything else to add before we wrap up, Shannon?
No, no, that's it.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. Yeah, I know this is a lot. I know the testing piece is real heavy. And yeah, it is. We have a lot of training on this and we want to share as much information as we can. And we acknowledge that it is heavy. We're not sorry, but I
No.
know it can be a lot for your brain. So there you go. You got it. You can re-listen to this. You can slow us down and you can
Yeah.
take it nice and slow, whatever you need. And we'll be back for mold part 3 in just the next couple weeks. We are a new podcast, so please like, subscribe. If it resonates, a 5-star review, like really, really goes a very, very, very long way for us. Like it means a lot to us. We really do enjoy recording the podcast and we want to share all of this information with you. So we would really appreciate any or all of that. If you need additional support, we do offer free consultations. There is a link down below or in the show notes, wherever you are listening and or watching this. Feel free to schedule a free consult. We would love to be able to support you and go, it just like make sense of this for you and in a way that hopefully doesn't hurt your brain. And so please never hesitate to reach out. We would love to help and support you. And thanks so much for joining. We will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.